we're at the bar. And this is going to go down very well with Brighton and Crystal Palace fans, isn't it? Because this is the first time I've personally done an interview with a Palace fan as a Brighton fan. But I feel like there's a common ground here. And that is, amongst all of the madness, no one understands why we hate each other. And I think that's where it needs to start, Ollie. Why do Brighton and Crystal Palace hate each other?
History is obviously not geographically based. I think a lot of people, when, as a Palace fan, common question I get is, "Oh, why do you guys hate each other? You're X amount of miles away." It's like, well, that's not what it's about. It was games in like is it the 70s, I think it was, or early 80s, where I think we played each other like 4 times in a season. Last game of that ended with your manager throwing coins at our fans, and then from then on, it's just the hatred organically grew, which I think is way better than, oh, we hate this team because we're nearby and nothing has ever really happened in those games, but oh, they're just down the road. Whereas us is like, it's based on something real. And even in recent years, like we've had games against each other, like the playoff semi-final, unlucky, where like that's just exacerbated things. So yeah, that's history, not location, is the main point.
If you take it all the way back, I mean, obviously we weren't born back then, but I mean, it's a mad point when you think about it. All it was is really 2 managers hating each other.
Yeah.
And from then you've got, as you say, the coins being thrown and, fans almost start latching onto it. And whether it's right or wrong, I don't know. Because I feel like with the fans in the general, they seem to look at it as you have to hate each other if you live near each other. And that's just really not how it is at all. And as you say, because we live so far away, not so much far away from each other, but it makes it better, doesn't it? You've got a reason to hate each other. It's not because you just live down the road. And I don't know about you, but in the last few years, obviously, before, historically, Palace have always been above Brighton, with the iconic banner that was students and pupils. Teachers and pupils. Yeah. But now it's obviously changed a bit. Do you feel like the rivalry still got that fierceness perhaps that it used to?
I think, yeah, from my perspective, I definitely think so. I think a lot of going back to kind of the history of location thing, I think a lot of actually Palace fans like to pretend that we don't hate Brighton and that the real rivalries with Millwall and with Charlton. No, I don't personally think that's right. I think that's kind of mainly because for the first time in living memory, for us at least, Brighton are now outperforming Palace, so it's easy for us to go, oh, well, we didn't even care in the first place, when in reality we do. I don't think the hatred has changed at all based on team performance. I think that will always be there. I think there's definitely an argument behind, if the general public don't get the rivalry, can you expect players to get the rivalry? And I think there's been a lot of discourse over the past few years of like, do Brighton players or Palace players even understand why we hate each other? The 2 main kind of protagonists of that are Lewis Dunk and Wilf. Yeah. One of them's gone, and it's like maybe you could say that influences it, but from a fan perspective, I definitely think that the hatred is still there. Like, that's not changed.
You say about obviously Dunk and Zaha. I mean, obviously historically Zaha always got the better of us. I think I personally, I can only say for myself, I feel like Zaha's sort of hatred sort of died down, just for me anyway, from when I was watching him with what he was doing in the local communities and charities, and I'd see how much of a genuinely nice guy he is. Yeah. I think that's what was then starting to make me feel like, okay, it's hard to hate someone when they're doing this much good stuff. Obviously, when it comes on the pitch, there's a hatred there. But do you feel like with Palace, I mean, you've got obviously your goalkeeper Whitworth, but is there really enough players in that ranks for you where they're really going to be enemies, if you like, of Brighton? Because we've now got Jack Hinchelwood coming through, who's a born Brighton fan from Worthing, local boy, and he's potentially what we're saying as our next Lewis Dunk. Do you feel like there's a next Wilfried Zaha, if you like, at Crystal Palace?
Not in the same way that they can play the pantomime villain. Like, I think we have players who get it through being at Palace for a long time, like someone like Joel Ward or Mitchell, who's obviously come through the academy, Whitworth, as you said, but like they're not gonna play into the narrative of those games as much as someone like Wilf will. Like, there's only so much Joel Ward can do in a football game in 2023. So I don't think there's any direct replacement in that sense, but I do think there's enough players that get it just about. And I think we've got a lot of academy players who hopefully will come into the first team soon, who will hopefully understand that too, growing up through the club. But I don't think there will ever be, maybe this is kind of nostalgia talking, but there won't be another Wilf in the rivalry, and I also don't think there'll be another Lewis Dunk in the rivalry of like someone who, like, every Palace fan hates him, absolutely hates him, and that's difficult to replicate again. I think those two are so unique in that sense, the role they play in the rivalry.
Yeah, agree. Okay, and then Brighton Palace, obviously, taking my bias hat off now. I'll look at Palace and I'll talk to you genuinely. Although it's difficult, I'll talk to you genuinely. It's been a very weird season, weird couple of years really for Palace. Going back to Roy Hodgson, you know, it didn't look so bad when he first came back, and then maybe now it's sort of going back to where it was. Obviously, the result against Liverpool last weekend wasn't the best at the time of recording this anyway. But Palace for you, what's the aim at the minute? You know, you say you're probably not looking at relegation, but is there a higher power there, or is it relegation and that mid-table ranks that you think is where Palace is?
Yeah, it feels like we spent 10 years consolidating, basically. Like, I think ultimately the club, as long as we stay up, will never be unhappy, really. Like, that is the main goal for us right now, is to stay in the division and build everything else with the Premier League money. You know, we've got a stadium which is not up to scratch. We've got a new academy, which is great, but there's still the Palace main training ground is not fantastic either. And it's like the goal for now is to just keep that Premier League money coming in, and then once the infrastructure is there, build off that. I think as a fan, that can get boring. Yeah. And a lot of Palace fans, I think there's quite a lot of unrest in our fan base at the moment, because I think the rehiring of Hodgson was a real statement of like what our ambitions were. Like with Vieira, yeah, we finished like 12th, which is where we finish every year. But there was still like, we took a bit of a punt and we signed a lot of players and it was fun. Whereas at the moment, it's not like Roy Hodgson.
Are you bored?
Yeah.
You are.
So I don't necessarily mind that, which sounds really weird. Like, I would rather be bored than stressed by Palace. I think a lot of Palace fans don't mind, would rather be in a relegation battle because it's more interesting, which I don't share that opinion. Like, people that, I would take going down and going to the Championship because it's more interesting. It's like, well, in theory, yeah, it is, but like, it's in reality, it's not. That's not for the good of Palace for that to happen. So yeah, I am bored, but whilst I'll still go every week. It doesn't matter if I'm bored or not. Like, my fandom for Palace doesn't change. It doesn't change how much I care.
Yeah,
I can be bored and still care about us a lot, if that makes sense. I have a bigger picture.
I get what you mean, because I feel like Brighton fans went through the similar thing. Obviously, you've been here a lot longer than us, as we know, as we were reminded when we were in the Championship. Yeah. But then, obviously we changed, didn't we?
Yeah.
And that's where it really sort of separated Brighton and Palace. We were trying something different. You were getting results against us, but we were playing well. And I think that we accepted the fact we'll play well and lose if it means the greater good of the club. But I feel like Palace haven't really been through that. You sort of did with Vieira, but you didn't stick with it for long enough. And I feel like that's what happened with us in that first sort of couple of years. Chris Hughton got sacked, and we were just a mediocre club. You know, we really were lucky not to be relegated in that second season. And I feel like if we did get relegated, I would have been surprised if we just came back up and went on this trajectory we have done. But at the same time, I don't know. I just feel like it was the right time for us to start moving on, because you didn't want it to get to a situation where it's boring.
Yeah.
But I don't know about you with Palace. Do you want there to be that difference? And, you know, say you take a risk and you get a young manager, which is relatively unknown, change the business model like how we did. Obviously, it'd be different because different clubs, whatever. But would you want to make that step? And if it meant you got relegated, or scrapping down there, but you're playing better, would you want to do that?
It's difficult. I think, like, going back to what we say about Brighton, I think the fact that you're our rivals has really exacerbated the unrest in Palace, because like Brighton have taken big risks and it's worked incredibly well. And it's like, I don't necessarily think Brighton should be held up as like, this is what you could be doing, because it could go wrong, and it has gone wrong for clubs in the past. And I think, as you said, it's different because I think ultimately, if Brighton was to go down, you have an owner who probably has enough money that he's willing to just put money in and it would probably be fine. Whereas Palace is very much like a self-sufficient model where we rely on like just Premier League money. We don't spend much money in transfer windows. We rely on Premier League money to kind of keep us going. We have a small stadium. We don't have much match day revenue. We don't really sell players, which is a massive problem for us, because we don't, like, if we were to go down, I don't think the business model wouldn't be sufficient to get us back up again, if that makes sense. So, and that's why I kind of get why the business model has to change at some point, but I don't necessarily think that point is now. Like, I'm happy to stay afloat for a bit, and then once the new stand is finished, then it's like, okay, now what? Like, that's the short-term goal, done. You then have to change. You have to be progressing elsewhere for the club to survive, because like, we can't do this forever, what we're doing now. We will eventually go down unless we start taking more risks.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you saying that, because obviously as Brighton fans, we were so used to being perhaps not in the shadow, really. Well, I suppose we were for a while, but not in the shadow in the last sort of 10 years as much. But I don't know. I just feel like with Palace, it is that stalemate. But there's one thing that isn't a stalemate, and that's our rivalry. Because, yes, okay, we forget about each other and then we play each other and we hate each other again.
Yeah.
And we're coming up to it that time again where I'm going to be nervous and feeling sick before the game. And it never seems to be easy. And when I say easy, I mean it's never, how do I put this way? It's never the best team wins. The best team doesn't win. Normally the worst team wins. In the last sort of 5 years, there's been some horrible moments, and I'm going to bring it up because I have to. But the Benteke thing was about a week before my birthday, mate. Thank you so much for that. In the middle of lockdown, it was cold, it was wet, it was dark. And I still remember it to most nights. And I don't feel like we've done that to you properly. I don't feel like we've hit you like where it really hurts.
Yeah.
Whereas you have to us. And I feel like that's always the worry going into most of these games.
Yeah. I mean, I think the closest thing we've had is probably the Mope last minute equaliser, but that was just an equaliser. So it's like, we didn't lose that game, whereas, we've had, I think, and we didn't dominate you in that game in the same way that you've dominated us in games. Like, so obviously Benteke was the biggest smash and grab in maybe in Premier League history. Even the year before that, when Ayew scored at the Amex, and it was like, you battered us that game. We really had one chance before like stoppage time.
Day off my birthday.
There you go. That period is just great for us. I mean, you're right. The best team almost never wins. Like, even when we lost at the Amex last year, I think you were the better team, but we weren't bad. I've seen us play a lot worse against you and get a result. Like, we had chances in that game, which we should have taken early on. It is interesting. It is a cliche of like, form goes out the window because it's Derby Day. Like, that does happen in Palace Brighton almost every single time. Over the past few years, Brighton have been better than Palace, and we've only lost once in that period. I know we've not really beaten you either, but like, it is, instead, a proper stalemate.
Yeah, I'm going to ask the questions now, like the ones you don't want to really answer. But do you feel most confident in a Brighton game? Like, is it a game where, because of the fact that you don't need to play well to beat us, and actually quite a lot of clubs do it to us. If you watch most of our games, it's normally the same sort of thing. If you time waste, put men behind the ball, you'll probably beat Brighton. That's the handbook of beating a De Zerbi or Potter side.
Yeah.
And Palace can do that, especially with Roy. I know we had a bit of joy against him a few years back in 2018-19 era, but still, it wasn't clear cut. It wasn't convincing. Apart from the Andone moment at the Amex, in 2018, which was fantastic. But that's really the only time where I can probably point the finger and say we've done you. Are you confident in a Brighton game, or is it just as worrying for you regardless of the results that we've had together?
It's just as worrying, because I think you are right that Palace's style generally over the past few years is the way to beat Brighton. Like, we don't like having a lot of the ball, and generally if we can give a team possession and try and hit them on the break, that's where we've always had the most success. And Brighton, conversely, want a lot of the ball, so it works. On the other hand, we always play horrendously against you. So like, the knowledge of like, oh my God, we're going to play awfully again. And like, ultimately, there's only so many times you can play so badly against a team before you get battered. And even though it's not happened, and it might not happen, it always feels like a 4-0 Brighton is just around the corner, because we've just ridden our luck so much against you in the past few years. And like, I guess some people say it's not luck, we've strategically let you have the ball and whatnot, but like, I've never gone into a Brighton game and gone, yeah, we're going to do them. I've not thought that in years, because that's partly symptomatic of just Palace generally. I don't really think that about when we play anyone anymore, but we just exclusively play awfully against Brighton. Even if we win and draw, I never go, yeah, you know what, we were the better team and we deserve to win. That probably hasn't happened against Brighton since like 2017.
But then neither here. And I think that's what it is. But there's never really... I think when we first got promoted, there was a reason to say you were much better than us. But that was purely because we weren't that good and we were naive to the Premier League, I'd say. Since then, we've definitely been better than you, but we've not necessarily been better than you on the day. And I think that's what it's always funny about. And this is exactly what I mean by this is a rivalry. This is exactly what a rivalry is. This is the sort of thing that screams rivalry. If it's a game where both teams aren't confident, they feel nervous going into the game, they never play well against each other, it's a literal smash and grab at the best of times from either side, that's a rivalry, isn't it? That's what football rivalry is. That's what hatred is.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, that's a cliche for a reason. Like, everyone is nervous. Like, I think at Selhurst, even when we're bouncing against Brighton, there's always a sense of nerves of like, it just feels different. And I think as much as a lot of fans, don't want to pretend that the Brighton thing is this new wave rivalry and, I hate Millwall or Charlton more. I don't have the same, even when we played Millwall in the Cup a few years ago, it doesn't feel the same as Brighton to me. Some fans would disagree with that, but I definitely think that's the case.
I'm going to push you lastly now. What your actual predictions are. I won't ask for a score because they never happen, but your actual predictions for the game. Are you confident? It's at Selhurst Park. It's under the lights. We're given the opportunity to play on a Thursday night. Sorry, I had to do. But what do you think? Is it a clear cut for you, or is it very, very nervy, same as ever?
I think it will be the same as always. Like, we'll probably sit in, offer very little on the counter-attack in the first half. You'll dominate the ball. Like, I can't see, even though I said it always feels like a 4-0 is around the corner, like, I can't see a team winning by more than a single goal, if at all. Like, I know you said not an actual prediction, but I feel like 1-1 is the safe Palace-Brighton bet, especially at Selhurst. Like, it's always 1-1 because we'll scab a goal from somewhere, defend, keep it tight. And I think, like, Palace are under pressure at the moment. Like, we've had a really poor run of results. Brighton at home, like, is a good opportunity to put things right. And generally speaking, to be fair to Roy, when he's under pressure, we tend to turn up and get results. Like, even Liverpool at the weekend, we lost, but we did, and we were missing a lot of players, but we were 1-0 up against Liverpool for 75 minutes before we got a red card. So it's like when the pressure's on, we turn up, and I hope we'll do the same against you next Thursday.
Ollie, been an absolute pleasure. Oh, by the way, just lastly to mention Redwood today. Pleasure to have you down. You say you come here quite a bit, just outside London Bridge Station. Prime location, isn't it, for Palace fans?
It is. I've had many an away day where this has been the meeting point before and after.
Oh, really?
Because it's just like, to watch football in here, it's just screens galore. Screens galore, inside and outside. Big one there. The ones outside are especially clutch, I think. Really like that. Good beer. It's perfect. If you're going somewhere to watch football, this is almost like front of mind for me every single time.
Ollie, pleasure. Hope you lose.